Hello, welcome, and good day. This is episode 9 of Pod for the People, your local podcast discussing topics of justice, equity, compassion, diversity, respect, and ways that we can make the world a better place. On the show, we feature special guests, musicians, comedians, educators, elected officials, advocates, activists, and agitators. I'm your host, the one and only Drew Glover, bringing you into my world to introduce you to the awesome people I work with, the amazing projects we work on, and ways that you can get involved. In case you didn't already know, I'm also a candidate for the Santa Cruz City Council election this November. Are you registered to vote? Well, before we jump into that or the episode, I need to let you know something super important. This podcast was created with the help of the 365 Producer Program. 365 Producer is an artist training program located right here in Santa Cruz. 365 Producer students learn all the skills you'd need to learn and create podcasts just like this one, as well as music, photography, artist development, and all kinds of other stuff. Check them out at 365producer.com and get your creativity on. On last week's episode, we spent time talking to Triana Feruza, a local musician raised in Santa Cruz since she was a whole 2 years old. She's a working student, a collaborator, working on creative projects across cultural boundaries and borders. She has an amazing vision of what she's going to be working on as she gets older and more into her artistic career of focusing on world music and bridging people across racial, cultural, and music divides. She also is a voice of youth in Santa Cruz, so if you didn't get a chance to listen to that one, go back and check out the last episode. It was really great to be able to hear her perspective talking about what it's like to be a young woman in Santa Cruz and the issue of rape culture. This week, we have someone super special to me on the show. She's known all around town by people working on a spectrum of issues. She's an advocate for sustainable transportation, ADA access, rent control, and the abolition of ICE. She's an immigrant, an outspoken advocate for sanctuary, and a close friend of mine, Ernestina Saldana. Welcome to the show, Ernestina.
Thank you, Drew. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, it's an honor to have you on the show. We've had a chance to work together for the last couple of years, which was really great. Whether
About 4 years?
Yeah, 4 years, yeah. Time really flies over time. You know, every time I talk to people about working and I start thinking about how long it's been in the community that I've been doing the work since like 2011, 2012. And I'm like, wow, that's 7 years, 8 years, somewhere in there. Almost at the 8-year mark. So good feeling, but it's amazing that it's almost been a decade doing community work in Santa Cruz because we still have so much more to do, but we've been able to accomplish a lot at the same time too. So how are things in your world?
Well, busy. You
Busy.
know, it's. I wish to say that things are getting calm and we can take a break, but the reality is that no, there is always something new, and thanks to this, the president that we have right now is keeping us in our toes all the time. Plus, rent control, and as you know, today we are gonna have to show up again to the city council to defend Measure M against the changes that the city council, especially Mayor Terrazas, is trying to do in weakening the ordinance that we took to the vote this November, and basically weakening the wish of 11,000 people who signed the original request for this measure to be placed on the ballot. So I wish to say we can take a break, but maybe no. Maybe, this is what is life.
Yeah, and there's that saying, it's a marathon, not a race.
Exactly.
Right? It's like a constant struggle. A constant struggle for liberation. But, it's the fight for justice and equity. And it's something that deserves our energy and time and dedication. And even, I was watching a film once by Lee Moon-wah, and it's called Last Chance for Eden. And it was one of the first documentaries I'd ever really watched around the topic of race and racism and interpersonal racism and stuff like that. And I was good until there was this one scene that just made me break down in tears. And it was of this older black man who was talking to the facilitator about the work that he's done and the experiences he's had over, through the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s and how all of that transition in reality has been for people of color, people of the global majority, people with dark skin. And then he stopped for a second and thought, and then realized that he was continuing to do the work not only for himself but for his son, and doing so with the understanding that he didn't know whether he would live to see the day where there was true equality. And as soon as he said that, I started bawling, and like uncontrollably, because it was this idea of this elderly man who has dedicated his time to try to make the world a better place, and who continues to do it even with the understanding that there's the potential that he may never see the promised land. You know, like Dr. King said, going to the mountaintop and seeing the promised land, and he might not get there with us. So we just got to keep moving forward.
Absolutely, and it's exactly my feeling. When and you saw, already that I have my background is to be native from this continent. I'm Nicantlaca. My grandparents were Jackie and Mescalero, so I was raised in that culture. And looking at that part of the equation, it has been always a struggle since the white men arrived, unfortunately. And I'm saying this not with the desire to make people feel bad about it, but with the understanding that the times that we are living now, we need to come to terms with that. And just as your teacher said, there's no reconciliation if there is no truth being told. So let's start ourselves talking the truth. Let's start ourselves sharing what it's like to be in these shoes, in these wheels. Okay, in such way you understand where I'm coming from, and I can understand where you are coming from.
And just so that people can kind of get an understanding of where you're coming from in general, because you just mentioned just some of your roots and your ancestry. If you wouldn't mind just letting people know that are listening that don't know you already, or that may have seen you doing the work but don't know where you're coming from with your perspective, just a little bit about Ernestina Saldana, where you come from, how you got here, and whatever you feel comfortable sharing. Yeah.
Well, yeah, let's not get into many details. But basically, my grandma says she was a Yaqui. And when the settlers, the conquistadores came to the area about Sonora and the north of Coahuila, they were making slaves, the Indians, to take them to Yucatan to be in the farms, in the Enequén farms. So my great great grandmother was one of the women who was in the process of our own trail tears, and she died in the way, and her little baby was put in a mission, and the missions, famous missions in all around the continent, and she was raised there to be a servant, and at some point she was just kicked out of the house in the middle of the revolution. So this is the background that I has been passed on to me. Okay, unfortunately, by being a 14-year-old in the middle of the streets per se, and the middle of the revolution was not the best upbringing for a child. Just yesterday, I was watching a video about the Korean, the Japanese kidnapping children from Korea and from the Philippines, and using them as sex slaves, basically, during the Second World War. And looking at that, that's a reflection of what was happening to the women in my family. And I came here to the United States, the place where my family was living, was a very agricultural area. But when the electrical companies start building the hydroelectrics that drain the aquifer for this area, it become a complete desert. And so my mother has to migrate to the city. So we were right there first stage immigrants. I was probably 3 years old when we arrived to the big city. And from there, we were always the Indian living in the city. We were the ones who have a lot of the language was still very mixed with the native language and things like that. So my mom's solution was that we had to forget who we were, in such way we could survive. And I did not find all these roots until I arrived to the United States 30 years ago, when I started listening, reading about the efforts that people in here, the Native people from here, were making and owning the roots and owning our ancestry, was when I was able to see myself in there and to reflect into what I had lost. And so, even within the native people, I am the newcomer, and I do not have a recognized status. I don't have a blood count. So even in there, I am outsider from there. But fortunately, in Santa Cruz, I have found a lot of support, not only from the Indian Council in here, but from the whole community. So for your listeners who cannot see me and do not know me, I use a wheelchair for mobility, a green wheelchair. So the woman in the green wheelchair, that's me. And 30 years ago, I was in an accident that led me paraplegic. And I came to this country looking for a job. It was the opportunity to find a job. Not because I want to live in here. My dream always was to go to Europe. And at the time, I was speaking fluent French because that was the place where I want to be. But I ended here for a reason. I was now in my 60, almost 60 years old. This November is my birthday, so get ready for the big celebration. So I always think that there is a reason for what things happen. I don't try to hit myself in the wall to make things my way. But I also think that I have the responsibility to speak up. Mm-hmm. I have the responsibility I cannot expect you to see what's happening with me if I'm not telling you first what's happening to me. Okay, so that's my basis, that's my philosophy. And what else can I say? I have been working in the United States from my arrival as a teacher, as a investigator for civil rights issues, as a shelter manager, as a county worker, and right now I'm retired. I have 3 children, ages 31, 23, 19, and 2 grandchildren, ages 9 and 10.
Wow.
7.
What an amazing journey and story and background. Thank you so much for opening up and sharing that with me and with people that are listening, because it's I knew a lot of the background, but not as much as far as your grandmother and that far back. So it's just really wonderful to hear how the universe, even amidst all of the tragedy and terrible things that have happened, created Ernestina Saldana and allowed you to be here to sit and for me to have the honor of sitting next to you and hearing your story, providing that perspective, and then also just talking about the reality of immigration, because we live in a time right now. The United States has always fluctuated with its approach and perspective of immigrants, but especially now, dealing with the current administration, dealing with the reality and existence of ICE and people that have really negative opinions about certain immigrants coming from certain areas of the world. What can we do is always my question, to broaden people's perspectives, get them to understand the reality of people that are immigrants, and find ways that we can work them into the community to be productive, positive members of our society, instead of ostracizing them or making them feel marginalized or have to hide away and all that kind of stuff. And Santa Cruz has taken some steps, by declaring that it's a sanctuary city, which is always wonderful to hear. And recently in San Francisco, there was a new law that was passed that allows undocumented immigrants to participate in the voting process of school systems or the school elections. What are your thoughts about that? Because I know there's some pros and some cons. Do you think that's a step in the right direction to be offering that possibility? Do you see any drawbacks to it? What do you think about?
Well, it's a lot of questions in there.
I know, yeah. We could just start with, what do you think about the new law?
The first thing I'm gonna say is that don't follow me because I'm lost. Okay, I am still looking for the way, and I prefer you walk in my side and we together try to find where we are going.
Exactly.
Okay. But about this new law, I will say something that I learned when I was studying for my citizenship test, and it's no taxation without representation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all the immigrants, and from different sources, I think that I can say that there are about 10,000 people in the city, only the city of Santa Cruz, who cannot vote because they are legal permanent residents, because they are TPS, because they are DACA, they are undocumented, they are UTV, BAWAS visas. Okay, so for different reasons, they cannot vote, but they are still living in here. They are still shopping in our shops. They are still paying our taxes. They are still um, doing everything else which is expected from a citizen. The only thing they cannot do is to have a voice. Like right now with this Measure M coming up, they are not going to be able to say what is their desire
Mm-hmm.
with this vote. And it's 10,000 people. If you start putting numbers in there, these people is renting, right? These people is paying a rent to somebody. Um, if we say that they are paying $1,000, just imagine the amount of money per month and the landlords are putting in their pockets, because that's people who cannot have a say in what's gonna happen. And this is a local election. This has nothing to do with the states, nothing with the federals. So if we were following the steps that San Francisco took, I said, why not to allow these people to have a say in what is happening in their life? We have an ordinance in place right now. This ordinance says that since February, the maximum increase that you can have in your rental is 2%. Okay. We are working with different apartment complexes right now, affecting around 200 people, where they have received rent increases regardless the ordinance. Some one family $400 increase. Okay, this is a way to get rid of these people. Okay, because maybe the landlord is thinking the ordinance is gonna become law, and then I'm not gonna have a way to really increase the rent. But if they left, then I can do whatever I want. In this situation like this, situation where I had to decide who is gonna be the new superintendent for my school, what kind of classes, cultural sensitive classes, are going to be able to teach in there, what kind of equality system is in place to allow those children to thrive. Those, yes, I think 100% that people who are the ones supporting the school, supporting the city, paying your taxes, making it to work in this way, they should have a voice. They should have something to say.
Yeah, you bring up a lot of really good points, both with representation in schools, but also in representation in issues like rent control. And it was brought to me the other day, someone was talking about Measure M, and they're feeling concerned because they drive around and they see all these no on M signs everywhere. But it's interesting because the renters that I've spoken to, when I say, well, would you put a yes on M sign in your front yard? They say, yeah, but I don't want to get in trouble with my landlord. So it's really interesting, not only the restriction of the voice or representation of undocumented people in the voting process, but also the restriction of the voice or representation of the renters and their own voice in their own place where they live, because they're afraid of retaliation from landlords. And retaliation is something that's being warned. San Francisco issued a statement of warning to undocumented people that if they do participate in the voting process, then their information could be made available to ICE or immigration enforcement. So that could still deter people from participating. And even outside of voting, just general participation in average everyday life that we take for granted as people that have documentation and or citizenship, being able to go to the stores, being able to take your children to school, or like, since I'm the chair of the Santa Cruz County Poor People's Campaign, trying to get them to come out to even town halls to talk about the issues of poverty that are impacting them directly, but not having them feel the freedom to move about and engage because of that constant fear of being persecuted or marginalized even further because of their documentation status. So always love that you bring it back to Measure M And that's a huge topic right now. And like, we're about to go down to the city council here in the next half an hour or something to speak against the new ordinance that's going on. But so people can know, why do you, someone that has this background in teaching and education, but also in advocacy, and someone that's an immigrant, why do you support Measure M?
Well, first of all, I had been homeless twice. Not because I did not work. I was working, I was just not making enough money to be able to pay for the rent, you know. And when the second time when I was homeless, I ended at the Pájaro Valley Shelter Services in Watsonville and the transitional housing in there. And I find out I got a job working there, and I work helping other. It's mainly for women and children, so helping other women that were in the same situation I was. Many of them were working or had a recent disability that didn't allow them to have full salary and lost the place where they were. Some of them came from domestic violence. But the point is, at the time when I was working in there, people who were able to complete the transitional housing program were able to get into the housing authority waiting list. So I had a lot of people who were already having their Section 8, and they were not able to get a place to rent because the difference between the HUD guidelines and the rental market. And one of the points that is happening right now with Measure M, and a lot of people say that it's abusive because it's asking for 6 months of rent when you are being evicted. But what they didn't say is that it's 6 months of the HUD guidelines, not the rental market in Santa Cruz. I'm going to put an example in such way is more clearly. Like, for example, right now in 2018, the HUD has said that for one bedroom, the maximum rent that they are going to pay through the Section 8 is $1,400. You go to Craigslist and you try to find something for $1,400 and you are not going to be able to find it. The one bedroom range of rent goes from $1,700 to $2,300, $2,700. And in that particular case, I find where the house was advertised, the apartment was advertised at $900. When I click and start reading all the information, it say 3 people can live in there very comfortable, paying each one $900. So before you start criticizing me, please check the facts. Okay, $900 is $2,700. When HUD is just giving the $1,400. Let's suppose that now I'm living in that house at $2,700. If I get evicted from there, and I'm gonna receive 6 months of the $1,400, okay, that's gonna be barely 3-4 months of rent, which is gonna pay for the rent for the first month, for the deposit, and for the last month. Okay, plus maybe the U-Haul to rent or things like that. When it should come to, as I say, I'm a person with disability, so to somebody like me being evicted, I cannot pack my belongings. I can pack what is at my level. You know, I cannot stand up. I cannot climb in ladders to get all the boxes or where. I'm going to have to pay somebody to help me pack. I'm going to have to pay somebody to help me move. I'm going to have to pay for the U-Haul. And I'm going to have to pay somebody to get everything out of there. In addition that, if I am lucky enough to find a house where the landlord is going to provide me with the opportunity to make modifications to the house, I'm going to have to build a ramp, maybe to widen the doorways, and all that is going to have to come from my pocket. So if I get evicted, 7 months is going to be barely covering the expenses for me to get into a new place.
Well, I really appreciate you going through that and clarifying it, because I know a lot of people get confused with the relocation assistance, and it's being used as a major talking point by the opposition as to why people should fight it. And another thing that I always hear when people are, I'm at knocking on doors and talking to people, and they are giving me either reasons they support it or reasons that they oppose it. One of the ones that they talk about is the discrimination that they claim will happen to people that are over 62 or people with disabilities. You're about to turn 60, so you're very close to that 62 mark, and you're in a wheelchair. So you're apparently you're not concerned about that as much as they would let on. So what is it that makes you support Measure M even amidst all of this fear tactic that you might not be rented to in the future?
Well, because there is no rental right now for us. That's the point. The Fair Housing Act was enacted in the 1995, let's see, the amendments. And it's very clearly spelled that it could not be discrimination against somebody who uses a wheelchair like me. But nevertheless, if you go and apply for one of these places, okay, you are going to be denied. I have never been able to find a house rented from a private individual. Okay, the single houses never had been able to do it. I have been able to rent apartments from people only when it has been in the lower floor and the house is already kind of accessible. Um, when I was living in the Osocales community house in the back in '95, I had to build the ramp, and I had to use a different wheelchair inside the house to be able to get to one bedroom. Only one bedroom I was able to get in the three-bedroom home we have in there. So right now there is no market for people with disabilities. You see people who are still living with their parents at the 30s, 40s because it's the only place that they got that wheelchair accessible. Okay, so I'm not afraid. In the contrary, I welcome the possibility to not being evicted. I welcome the possibility to have a place where I'm going to be able to live and stay there. Instead of being worried every month, like, what if the landlord is going to increase my rent? What if the landlord is going to ask me to move? So I am glad that this happening. My record for rent is pristine. Every month I pay my rent even if I don't have anything to it, but the rent goes far. So all the record that you can see about my rental, it has been pristine, completely clean because of that rule my personal rule. But at the same time, it doesn't work because there is no places that you're going to be able to get.
Yeah, and it's it's always really disappointing because it seems like the reasons why people say that we shouldn't vote for Measure M tend to come off to me more as threats, which is really interesting. If we pass it, then people are going to take their rental places off the market. If it passes, then people are going to discriminate more against older people or people with disabilities. When I'm hearing that from landlords that are saying that. I don't talk to renters and they say, oh, I don't support it because these things will happen, because they're already happening and it's not like it will exacerbate things more. The problem, though, is that it's like you either don't pass it and let us keep all of our rights as property owners, which then puts renters totally out to dry and has no protections, or you pass it and give renters protections and we as landlords are going to make things way harder on you because we're going to react. It's always disheartening whenever I hear that argument, because I always hope that when it passes in November, people will acknowledge that it's important and necessary to provide renters protections for people that live in Santa Cruz, to keep people in Santa Cruz, and to continually have a sense of diversity in Santa Cruz, because that's what they said in other cities that have rent stabilization and renters protections, is that they have higher levels of diversity of people that can stay in the city to exist amongst the costs of rent and living, as opposed to having to get priced out and move out of the city, which then creates a severe lack of diversity, both in income levels, but also in cultural backgrounds and ideologies and identities. So it's just a constant a constant struggle, but that's why we are working diligently to make sure that works. And Justin Cummings and I are the only two candidates out of all of the candidates that have come out in public support of Measure M, which is pretty telling of it in itself.
Yes, it is. And I'm very grateful to you and to Justin for making the effort into supporting this campaign. I know how difficult it may be for you. I was present the last time when one of the landlords threatened you, asking you, "Oh, are you the one who's running for city council?" So I know how difficult it must be for you. But let me just expand a little bit in what you're saying right now, because there is no savings in having this ordinance that Mayor Terrazas is supporting. And just remember also that Mayor Terrazas works for the firm that is representing the landlords. Okay, just if there is no conflict of interests in there, I don't know what other name I to give it in here. But what happened when people can no longer live in the area? What happened when people can no longer stay in Santa Cruz? Okay, they had to move to another places. Let's say in this case, Watsonville. These people are not the people who's able to work for Google or Facebook, and they have plenty of money to pay for whatever place. Those are the people who were evicted from their places due to the rent increase. Okay, and I'm gonna call it eviction because there is no other word for me. So that people now are living in Watsonville, but still working in Santa Cruz. The freeway that we have clogged completely at commute time is the proof of how many people has to come and work in Santa Cruz from Watsonville, from other areas. Let's look for a little bit about the unit of the family in there. Now the family has to wake up earlier, has to get ready to come to work earlier, has to get the children alone by many times, had to the kids has to lucky had to walk by themselves and stay alone in the house, which create a different kind of situations. Now that kid, if they get into trouble, the principal calls the mom cannot go in there because the kind of job that she's working is not the one that's going to allow her the half of hour just to get there, the hour to be talking to the principal, and the other half of hour to come back. So that kid is in his own. And now that kid is going to be targeted as a problem kid. And that kid is going to probably end within the juvenile system and things like that. So there is no savings in there. Because now that kid is going to require counseling, is going to require different kind of status. The parents are going to have to look for somebody to take care of them, paying more time, more money into childcare and all that kind of things. All because that family was not able to remain where they work. Mm-hmm. I used to live in Salinas and work here in Santa Cruz. And one time I got a call from the school saying, your son fell from the playground and he broke his head and he had to be taken to the hospital. I was able to tell my bosses I had to go and check on my son. It was an accident in, what is this?
Highway 1?
Not Highway 1, but when you go to Santa Cruz before Prondale.
152?
Yeah, right there before Prondale, you know that there's only a two sides road, and it was an accident there. It took me 4 hours before I was able to get to Salinas, to the house. My son was already very anxious because I was not there. He was at the hospital, and the lady who wants to take him back to the school was not allowed because I had to go and sign the release or whatever. It was in that moment when I say I had to work where I live. And my job wasn't here, and was when I moved to Santa Cruz. And I just reflect that in every parent. You have to have your children where you work. But there is no job in Watsonville. Okay, so you had to come all the way here for that job because here is the places where you can be cleaning rooms, when you can be chopping vegetables, when you can sweep the bedrooms and things like that. You know, here is that kind of job in here. If that people is not here, the touristic business from Santa Cruz, which is supporting Santa Cruz, will fail. And the city will feel the lack of that. Okay, so it is once again the realization that we depend on each other. The job that I cannot do, somebody else can do it. Why I not support that? And I'm going to tell you what, because rental for the landlord is a business. Mm-hmm. We are not human beings. They want profit. And just as Stacy Falls say in the first forum, this is the only business that ours will return the investment.
Guaranteed investment and return, yep.
Exactly.
And it's important to acknowledge that landlords come in varying shapes and sizes, and there is a group of landlords that support rent control and Measure M in Santa Cruz. It's really interesting, too, because it kind of goes to show the spectrum of where people can land, and the people that are dedicated to a Santa Cruz that works for everyone, a Santa Cruz where people are able to stay and live and work with their families instead of having to drive hours on the freeway. And another aspect to that is keeping families together in general, which, studies have shown that when you live in an area with uncontrollable rent or really loose renters protections, then families that with kids that grew up in the area, the kids are no longer able to stay in the area because of the cost of rent is too high if they're not able to live with their parents anymore for whatever reason, which requires them to move out of the area, which then removes that social capital of having your family support around. So if you have a couch you need to sleep on, or if you need someone to be able to support you or whatever, get a ride somewhere, if you're living in a totally different city without that support from your parents, there's a higher likelihood that that child, if they run into financial issues or some kind of an unforeseen circumstance, will end up then homeless. And then it creates this cycle of, because once you become homeless, then comes the feelings of self-worth or mental health issues, and then that comes with all of those other kinds of things that we see when we look at the issues facing people that are living outside or experiencing homelessness, and all of that due to uncontrolled rent and unmitigated, or rather unestablished protections of renters. It just shows that it's, like you mentioned before, it's more of an investment in the community to pass measures like Measure M, but also at the same time pushing on a state level to pass Proposition 10, which would then repeal Costa-Hawkins, because that's another argument that people against rent control make, is that it'll only affect 25% of the housing units in Santa Cruz, but that's only because Costa-Hawkins exists on the books in California, which makes it so that rent control does not apply to any buildings built after 1995. We take that and pass Prop 10, take off Costa-Hawkins, then rent control will apply to every rental unit in Santa Cruz, and then that will make some serious change with regards to the way that we see rentals, renters protections, and people being able to stay in the area. So much.
I want to add something else in here. When we were crafting Measure M, I reached out to Rochelle Noroyan, asking her to meet with me in such way we could discuss. I could share with her why I thought that the 7 months was fair for a person with disabilities, and she refused. So we reached out to them. They did not want to work into making something that will help all the parts because they already had their mind made, right? But that's, the way how you put it is exactly what is in the heart of this measure, okay, to stabilize the neighborhood. One of the things I asked when I was asking for signatures to put the measure in the ballot, when I came to a house and the woman will come, or the man, or the couple will come and say, this doesn't apply to me because I am an owner. And I always ask, do you know your neighbors? Have they been here longer? Do you have your children living in here? How frequently you see your grandchildren? And most of the time, the people will sign when they realize that was because of rent increases, that was not happening. I lived for a while in an affordable mobile home park where one of the people living in there was an elder disabled man. And when he got sick, the neighborhood will bring food, will bring meals every day, and he was really grateful with that. We were able to take care of him because we knew each other. It was no fear from him to be poisoned by us, and it was the heart on us to say, hey, I have a little more from my food, let me share it with him. So that's when you realize that when you have a neighborhood that is stabilized, is when you can start building that kind of relationships. The kids have a support system within the other residents, and each one of us has a way to feel comfortable in there.
Students play a big role in what might happen in November, especially because the majority of students, I might say 100% of the students, are renters here in Santa Cruz, except for the ones that live on campus, but even they are still potentially paying rent for dorm costs and all that other kind of stuff. So there's been conversation because the student voice is powerful here in Santa Cruz, and their ability to vote in local elections is powerful in representing interests outside of property owners and landlords. So what, part of the conversation that's happening right now is people saying students shouldn't be allowed to vote in local Santa Cruz elections. They should only vote to where they're coming from. What do you say to that?
Well, why do you want me to be supporting the place where I'm no longer there? And when students come, the reason why they don't, they many of them get really involved in the community and had make a big impact within the community, but they cannot stay because there is no way they can afford the rents in here. My own children, they don't live in here because there's no way that they can't be paying for their tuition and paying for rent living in here. So I believe that the students are living in here, the issues happening here, right here, right now. So they should be, once again, it's the same thing, right? Uh, People who are undocumented or who are no citizen cannot vote. They can pay me the taxes. They can give me all the goods, okay, but they cannot vote. They don't have vote. They shouldn't have representation. It's the same thing with the students. We blame the students. Oh, the students are the ones who are causing this crisis. The students are the ones who come and get all the houses. But why you focus on the negative? The students bring a lot to the community. The university makes Santa Cruz what is. Okay, this progressive, this open-minded, this welcoming environment is thanks to the university. I have lived in places with no university, and believe me, that's a nightmare. Okay, big people is really close-minded. People are really judgmental. So this is the kind of place we have is thanks to university. So once again, we want the students to buy our goods, to pay for them, to contribute to our economy, but not to have any voice. I think that, one thing or the other, but not both.
Right. And I just love your no taxation without representation kind of nod, tip of the hat, because that is exactly just a wonderful way to look at it.
Both very American.
A very, very American way to look at it, exactly. And with students especially, it's the fact that not only are they here for 2 or 4 years of their life, so that while they're here, they may be coming in on an election where they're going to be here for the next 4 years. So that's going to make a big impact, not only on who's on city council, but also on some of the policies that are being passed. But I always think about setting the stage for the students that come after them. It's when I was out there collecting signatures for rent control, one of the arguments that I got when I came up against the homeowner was that they had to work super hard and save all of their money so that they could buy a house in Santa Cruz. And if they had to work that hard, then everyone else should have to work that hard. And it kind of I was taken aback by it because it's completely counterintuitive to the way I see the world, where it's our job to make things easier for the next people that come after us, because we have learned and been able to shape and reshape the world so that people are able to accomplish things without as much struggle and without as much pain and without as much hardship on themselves, but still be able to enjoy the fruits and benefits of the knowledge that was earned before them. So just in that same mindset with students, ideally students will not only be voting in elections where they're going to school because they're going to be experiencing and dealing with those policies over the time of their time at the school, but also to be cognizant and conscious about the students that will be coming after them and what will the impact be if Measure M doesn't pass for whatever reason, and in 2 years, 4 years, more students come in and there's let's just say that they adopt Mayor Terrazas' suggestion. In 4 years, rent could go up by 40%. And no one would have to pay relocation fees. For those of you listening that don't know about the ordinance suggestion, instead of it being capped at 2%, which is what's lined out in Measure M, and without having to give relocation assistance as it's lined out in Measure M, the ordinance suggested by Mayor Terrazas, and who, as pointed out by Ernestina, has connections and relationships with firms and property owners that are actively working against Measure M. His proposal is that landlords would have the ability to raise rent by 10% every year. So that means that if you're paying $1,000 for rent, you're going to be getting a $100 increase every year. But if the landlord decides to do it over that for 15% or over 15% over 2 years in a row, then they'll have to pay you some form of relocation assistance if you choose to move, because you may not have another place to go. And so you're either stuck in paying this exponentially increasing rent, or you're going to have to move and get limited relocation assistance if it fits within that very specific criteria into another place they can raise your rent by 10% every year.
And also, this new measure that Mayor Torresas is pushing doesn't have eviction protection. So I can get the $100 more, or I can evict you. You know, and every time I evict somebody or I have an empty unit, I can raise the rent with whatever limit I want. Okay, there is no cap for that. So I can rent my apartment for you this year, and next year and ask you to leave and have somebody else and keep on going. There is no eviction protection, which is one of the main things also in the Measure M, one of the main protections.
So something to be conscious about, something to keep on your radar, something to be tuned in on. Of course, this recording won't go out until after the meeting tonight, but it's important for people to be aware of the things that are going on and be conscious about the differences of the things being pushed by the community as opposed to things being pushed by the power structure, which is always a stark difference. So we have a couple more minutes on the show. Really love just all of your analysis, Ernestina. It's so wonderful to have your perspective, especially you come from a place of intersectionality. You know, you're not just someone that has a disability. You're not just an immigrant. You're not just a woman, even though none of those are justs in the first place, especially in the world that we live in. But you represent a perspective that intersects all three of those, as well as a mother, as well as an educator, as well as a community activist. So you're one of the reasons why you're so important in my life is the perspective that you bring and the reality that you always remind me about every time we hang out with each other and get a chance to talk about the issues. So thank you. You're also into when we talked about rent control a lot, we talked about immigration a little bit in your background and voting. You're also into the environment.
Yes.
Right? Which I hope everybody is into the environment, but you more than others, right? You're an advocate. You get out there, you're rolling around at marches and involved with things, and you actually went up to the Rise Together or Rise for Climate march that was in San Francisco.
That's true.
And I didn't get a chance to go, unfortunately, because I was down here in Santa Cruz doing work over the weekend and going to some of the local activities around here to be able to talk to voters about some issues. But there is a clip here. It's about 2 minutes from KTVU kind of covering the march. We'll listen to it, and then would love to get your feedback.
Climate Change Summit takes place in San Francisco next week, but the issue of climate change took center stage in the city this morning. Demonstrators hit the streets calling for more action to combat climate change. As KTVU's Lee Martinez reports from the Embarcadero, protesters want to see a shift to a renewable energy economy.
Well, this is the first time San Francisco has hosted the Climate March. It coincides with other marches happening across the country, and it also coincides with a very important date coming up. The Climate March in San Francisco comes days ahead of the Global Climate Action Summit on September 12th. Governor Jerry Brown organized the summit after President Trump pulled the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Several organizations gave voice to populations hurt by climate change.
We know what's really happening, and we just are saying we don't want to be this, in these sacrifice zones. We have indigenous peoples that are facing the permafrost melting in their homelands in Alaska. Our brothers and sisters here in California who are losing their land, their rich, beautiful land, because of the fires. These were prophecies that our elders told to us, that we have to take action and real action. And that's why we're here to say communities first, not corporations.
Demonstrators want world leaders to take a more aggressive approach to combating global warming and a phase out of the use of fossil fuel extraction.
So we need policies that are based on community solutions, that are based on a just transition from the fossil fuel extractive economy to one that is based on a renewable, clean energy economy that has access to safe and clean, well-paying jobs for those workers who will eventually be displaced by the fossil fuel industry.
And they urged others to get involved to strengthen the political power of those fighting for the environment.
And if you live in California, you know from wildfires to drought to rising sea levels, our state is at risk. Fortunately, you live in one of the best places to take action. Get involved with a community organization in your town. You can be part of going to 100% renewable energy. You can be part of stopping the coal export terminal in Oakland. You can be part of promoting more public transportation.
In San Francisco, Lee Martinez, KTVU, Fox 2 News.
Well, let me make the bridge between what we were talking about and this march. You were saying about this landlord who say that he doesn't want to leave anything for the generation coming after because he had to pay for what he got. So every time, everyone needs to scratch their own back, right? That's the capitalist way of talking. That's, unfortunately, the white men talking. My grandma taught us at a very young age that we had to plant a tree. Not for us, because you know how long it takes for a tree to grow. So it was not for us. It was for the people coming behind. It was because the people coming behind will be tired and they will look for shade. And they will be maybe looking for the food that the tree will bring. And when they sit in there, they will bless me for planting that tree. That's our way of thinking. And I get really emotional when I'm talking about this. Why people ask me, why are you so involved in the environment? Why do I take the environment like this? Is because that's my religion. That's the religion of my people. That's what my ancestors had to live and were killed for. Defending Earth, defending the planet, defending the water. I already told you what happened. We have to migrate to the city because there was no longer water in there. When I was going to college as a civil engineer student, I had to cross to the state line to another state. And I will drive very early in the morning to get on time. And this stretch of highway, the freeway, the road, I had to go through really wild area. There were coyotes, there were deers. I had to be aware of that, not to hit them or things like that. And within the 4 years of my going to college, the environment around started changing. First, people start doing agriculture in a place that has planting alfalfa in a place that has only 2 inches of rain per year. That completely depleted the aquifers. And by the end of my 4 years, it was an industrial zone. It was lucky for me because the Renault put a plant in there. And the Renault has a wastewater treatment plant. This was the first time when I see that. So because I started working for the Renault was the way how I was able to go to France to do my master's in environmental engineering. And I traveled the north of Africa where people were already drinking sewer water. Treated sewer water was their drinking water. And when I saw that communities in Africa, I was able to see that my country was going to that way, at least the north of Mexico. And was when I specialized myself in wastewater treatment. I came back to Mexico less than a year later was when I became disabled and I had to migrate to find a job. That's the reason why I'm ending here. So it's the teaching of my ancestors and my own passion is the environment. I was reading recently a report. I cannot tell you right now who was it, but I can show you the link later. where basically what scientists are talking about is that we have three possible futures. One is complete devastation. Society and humanity stop living as it is. The second one is that we really get ourselves together and change right now in this moment the ways how we are living and start respecting the one that support us, Earth, and all the animals and all the plants around. Or the third one is, Earth it goes into getting rid of us and start something new. Okay? So I don't know you, but I love you and I love everybody around and I love courage, and I always think that courage has a soul in there. So I think this is the way how I was raised, to respect every living creature in Earth. Okay? I don't eat meat for that reason. I eat vegetables, and every time when I get my carrots, when I got my cucumbers, I thank them for being able to nourish me. That's the way how I was raised. And we can live again in the capitalist way of living, saying, I got this cucumber and it's mine, and I'm not going to share it with anybody. Or we can say, if we work together, we will have more cucumbers and not to share. I was reading in an article for 300.org, that 350.org, that to retrofit every house with solar panels in the United States will be cheaper than the war we are fighting in Iraq. So what are our priorities as people? What are our priorities as humanity? All these conversations that we have about housing, about transportation, about immigration, is bullshit if we don't have an Earth. Okay? So we are a moment in history, a big moment in history, in which we can forget, you and I, your people, all the ancestors that you have been, all this history that your ancestors have, and all the history that my ancestors have, work together to teach our white brothers and sisters that they need to, this religion of capitalism that they have embraced is not the way. We have to go back to our roots.
And that was exemplified at this march in San Francisco, because not only, and it's interesting the way that they framed it in the KTVU article. They said populations impacted by climate change. They didn't recognize or acknowledge that this was not only the largest gathering for climate justice in the history of the West Coast, but that it was led and predominantly coordinated and looked to for leadership of and by the Native American population in the surrounding areas of California and around the country. So it's important to not only acknowledge that, but also acknowledge the past, like you mentioned before, about how your ancestors have fought and died for protecting the environment, and that can be said to be the same for the majority, if not all, of the indigenous populations of the world that have been decimated by colonialism and capitalism, coming into their sacred spaces and their sacred lands and trying to extract and cultivate as much as it can, even in the destruction of that land. Right now, the Amamutsan is having that issue down in their sacred lands just around the Salinas area, where they're protecting it and fighting fervently to protect it from being mined for gravel. It's this concept that we're willing to go in and violate sacred natural spaces that have been preserved for thousands of years by indigenous people and their ancestors to mine for gravel. It just seems so... I'm always in disbelief when I hear that kind of stuff, because it always reminds me of the movie Ferngully and like the giant evil machine that gets possessed by the oil spirit from the tree and then goes to destroy the entire forest. And just the concept around justifying that and being okay with it, it blows my mind. But that's why we have people like the 30,000, 50,000, some suggest 80,000 that marched in the Rise for Climate March this weekend. It's the fight that's going on every day in the community, and it's interconnected. You mentioned before, drawing connections and drawing lines between the conversation of immigration to the conversation of housing justice to the conversation of climate justice, and how it all weaves together. And the constant thread is the need to shift away from the concept or the mentality of profit as the primary driving motive, as opposed to sustainability, people, and the world around us as being our primary motive for why we do what we do. We should be working every day to protect something, not destroy it. And it seems so counterintuitive to me, but that's why I love knowing people like you. That's why it's an honor to be able to do the work with you, and why it's an honor to have you support my city council campaign in what we're going to accomplish this November of radically sustainable, people-oriented politics in Santa Cruz, moving away from money, focusing on the community voice, bringing in the perspective of the underserved and hearing from them what they want to see change, not bringing in outside consultants to tell them what they need or what's better for them. But, you know, from someone with your expertise, a master's in environmental design, and someone that's traveled and fluent in multiple languages, what is it that makes you support the campaign or me for city council?
Well, I have been working with you, close to you, for the last 4 years since Project Coordinate, and I know that you have integrity and that you have determination and that you don't give up, and you are supportive of, because of your own experience, of all these issues that we have just mentioned through. So that's, I cannot find a better candidate. Okay, I love you like my son, and you know that, and we'll be here for you. And even if I cannot be canvassing with you any longer because all the things that are going on right now in with the Sanctuary and the other organizations I'm working with, but I am there for you. And I'm going right now with the Measure M, going to the beach flats, for example, and passing flyers about the protections that they will have. And I was saying, just for vote for Justin and for Drew, because they are the only ones who are supporting this measure. Okay, so people around me knows that I trust you.
Well,
I trust you, and you know that that's not easy for me.
Yeah, thank you, Ernestina. That means more than I can put into words as far as appreciation for your support and your love and just the energy that you put out so much into the community to make things a better place. And what you're doing is what everyone needs to do is have those conversations with friends, right? That's exactly the way we're going to win this November, is to have personal conversations with friends and get engaged. Absolutely. Since we're at the end of the show, though, and I'm going to talk more about that, we're going to play some disco on the way out. But yes, conversations with friends are the way that we'll win. We can have events at your friends' houses. If you have a park that you know that's near your house and we want to go out and walk that neighborhood and invite people for a barbecue, maybe a disco barbecue, right?
Why not?
Why not? It'll be fun. It'll be engaging. Thank you again to our guest of the day, Ernestina Saldana, an advocate for transportation, sustainability, rent control, Measure M, the abolition of ICE, transitioning away from the capitalist mindset and focusing more on community, sustainability, and ways that we can work together as brothers and sisters in this crazy world that we live in, fighting every day to make it a better place. Next week, tune in on all kinds of great stuff. We're about to head out the door right now to the city council meeting. I know you're not going to hear this till after the city council meeting, but if you missed it, plug in, find out what's going on, and make sure that your voice is heard around these really important issues like rent control and transportation and all those other things like immigration, sanctuary. They're all being discussed by the city council at almost every meeting. And even if they're not on the agenda, you can go there and speak specifically in support of something that you care about. Leave a comment in the comment section underneath the podcast. You'll also find links to the climate march. You'll find links to some of the work Ernestina and I have been working on together. And you'll find information about why you should vote yes on Measure M in the comments. We'll be seeing you next week. Big props to 365 producers. Big props to the Drew Glover for City Council campaign, and big props to you for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Disco!